So now into the next section, which is the network automation piece, where I'll be covering the workflows as well as the services. And I have a couple of slides where I'll kind of take you through to give you an idea on what exactly I'm going to cover there. But just to give you an idea on what are the different pieces in Atom that come together to deliver this holistic automation solution. So we have the workflow engine that sits right on the top. As you can see, this is the BPMN 2.2 compliant workflow engine, which also sometimes is called as a low-code automation workflow engine. So we have that sitting right on top. The Anuta portal is nothing but Atom's UI, but you really don't have to use the UI to go ahead and trigger any of that. You can use our northbound APIs to trigger any of the automation use cases. Then we also have the service models. This is something that's based on Yang. So we have that as part of our architecture here. And you can see that the service model is basically going to go ahead and interact with the device models. The device model is going to be either a native Yang model from the vendor, or it could be an open config model, or it could be a CLI-based device. Right? And then you can see that how all of this comes together. So the workflow engine is directly able to go ahead and talk to the devices. It would use a telnet SSH or API netconf directly go ahead and talk. So it can use the raw CLIs or API calls to do that. Or it can invoke the service models, and then the service models will talk to the device models and then kind of go ahead and provision the device. Or it could be the other way around. There could be scenarios where the service models would invoke workflows. I'm going to cover all of that in the examples today. All right, and the workflow engine also is a bidirectional engine. So for all our closed loop automation scenarios, this is what will come in place, where we are going to listen to one of SNMP traps, syslog, or telemetry, and based on that, the baseline behavior is going to be verified. The KPI thresholds are going to be checked, and then for every breach, we are going to go ahead and do a remediation, or even go ahead and raise a service ticket. Okay, so let's go into the specific sections now. So the first one is the Atom's workflow engine. So the Atom's workflow engine typically handles the stateless kind of use cases. And when I say stateless, these are going to be where you don't really need to maintain the life cycle of services. And typically in a customer environment, these are going to be like the method of procedures, and they're going to have a set of pre-checks. They're going to have the activity itself, and then they're going to have the post-checks at the end of it. And mostly these are paper-based standards, or there may be some kind of siloed automation that they're using today. But what we're trying to do here is to bring in a visual appeal to that, standardize those method of procedures, and so that everybody interprets the same way, and there's a process and consistency that we can bring to these method of procedures. And when the workflows are executed, or rather when you create certain workflows or utilize the workflows in Atom, they're going to take different shapes to basically handle each of those use cases. So we have the software upgrades. Right, so they're going to be this traditional the method of procedure. You can any customer would have as a software upgrade MOP. So that is something that we can handle. Then we have provisioning workflows, and then we can have some of the closed loop automation workflows. And then we'll also see how we can build some of these workflows using the workflow builder. All right, so let's go back to the UI screen now. All right, so let me just quickly give you an idea on, or rather give you a use case here, right? So let's assume that there is a customer and he is trying to figure out if there's been a massive software rollout, and he wants to figure out if there is any kind of software, is there any kind of deviation that is there from the golden software template or image that they've been using in the network, and they have a multi-vendor network, right? And it's very difficult, and even certain vendors have multiple platforms, and every platform has a different OS version. Very difficult to kind of go ahead and figure out that. So that's why we have a software compliance, which will help them to go ahead and figure out if there is any kind of change. So we'll go ahead and audit this against our inventory data, figure out if there is any kind of variation, and kind of give them this particular report and tell them that, okay, this is the expected version, this is the profile that was executed, and there is non-compliance that we have detected. Now, what would we do from here, right? Traditionally, he would go ahead and he'll go and pick up each of those devices and upgrade it. And there's going to be a method of procedure associated with this. And that is where Atom comes in. So this is the first example that I want to show you here. It's a software upgrade, out of the box software upgrade procedure that we have automated using our workflows. So in this case, let me just walk you through this real quick, right? So any method of procedure will have a set of pre-checks first. It may have a set of prerequisites that you would want to set, and then there's going to be the upgrade process in this particular example, and then there's going to be a set of post-checks. So here, as you can see, and let me just zoom in a bit. So you can see that we are going to check if the device is online. We're performing some version checks. right? And then once the platform is kind of like validated, we understand that it's a Junos platform, then we can go ahead and doing a backup of the configurations. And then once that is done, we are going to execute some of the basic prerequisites, like we want to check the disk space before even uploading the image. So we're going to check that. And then there is again, some of the backup data is happening. There's an in-service upgrade that is being planned here. So there are multiple levels of upgrade. So all those different prerequisites are being checked. Then there's a pre-check, and pre-check is going to be a set of show commands here. Right? Maybe that we want to check how's the traffic doing before the upgrade, what are the counters, how is the interfaces performing. All the statistics is being collected here. And then we can go ahead and upload a set of images. Now this upload could be from an external like a server, so we can go ahead and contact a TFTP server, upload the image into the device, or it could be even Atom's image server. So we have an image repository within Atom, so we can go ahead and upload it to Atom's image server, and then you can upload it from there to the device. And then you can see there is again sort of prerequisites happening. So here you can see that we are performing a lot of those pre-checks, prerequisites. The upgrade itself is happening here. And then finally, there's a set of post-checks that are happening. Now, all these ticker boxes that are here are different workflows which are happening in the background. So these are all some of the reusable workflows that we have as part of Atom and are being called into the main workflow. So this is the parent workflow, and there are a lot of sub workflows that are happening behind the scenes. And as that happen, and there's a value that comes out of that, is just going to be passed into the main workflow. And then we are going to make some assumptions based on that, make some decisions based on that rather, and then go forward. Okay, and we know that there could be error scenarios, right? There's always a possibility. Let's say the device does not respond, or maybe the CLI command does not basically return the correct values. It could be anything. It could be generic, or it could be very specific ones. So in that case,
Yeah. So before you do the upgrade, is there anything to check? Is it a valid upgrade from where you are to the next step?
You could do that. Yeah, of course we could do that. So in this particular one, of course, we're just verifying if there's a version. We are checking the existing version of the device, and then if the device version is already the same as that of the one that's being upgraded, then we kind of come out of the workflow. But otherwise, we go ahead and upgrade this. But in case you have a different condition that you want to validate, that's something that you can bring into this workflow. So there's just another task here where it'll go ahead and validate if it is being executed from a NX to a Y. And if it is not, then maybe we have to come out of the workflow and notify the customer.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Right. So I was talking about the error scenarios, right? So we can go ahead and handle them here. You can see these specific icons that I'm highlighting here. They're all actually going ahead and catching those specific or generic errors that may come up as part of these, and then all of them are being routed into an approval form here. Right, so you can see that every error scenario is being routed to an approval form, and subject to an approval, we'll go ahead and do a rollback. So we can roll back from any of these places, right? So let's say it's coming here, then we have to roll back, or whatever we have done till here, we could do that as well. Okay, so we can handle, it's like more of a triggered rollback and at this point, right? So that's what it is. Now, let me show you one of the pre-checks. Now, how things can get very, very, in the sense, difficult in terms of some of these MOPs is where, let's say the number of pre-checks that we're looking at. Now, this particular MOP that we developed here, the number of show commands that we're executing is probably around 40 to 45 different commands, right? And these are all part of the pre-checks as well as the post-checks. And it's just about going ahead and firing these commands, but it's about going ahead and validating them as well and making sure that none of the pre-checks are failing, because if one of them fails, it typically means that you cannot go ahead with your activity. So we're going and checking that, we're validating that, we're also making sure that any errors are captured, and then we're escalating that back into the main workflow here so that the parent workflow knows if there is any kind of a pre-check or a post-check failure. All right, and these workflows, of course, can be directly executed, they can be paused, they can be resumed, and they can even be retried upon an error. And every task that is being executed here will actually be documented. So there'll be you should make sure that anything that is happening behind the scenes is documented and available for the customer. Now, how do we go ahead and create these workflows? And that's where our workflow builder comes in. So that's actually packaged into Atom. And you can create these workflows by yourself. I've just one of the examples, I'm really going to quickly go through that. So here, the different tasks that you can create, like let's say you can take user inputs. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, the user inputs need not be really from Atom. It can come from an external, like an outbound portal as well. But you can create a user form. Then you can have some of the service tasks where you can go ahead and make sure that you're firing those commands onto the device and there's some output coming back from the device and you want doing some post-processing on top of it. So that's going to be handled by the service task. There could be script tasks where you can go ahead and execute a set of scripts that you already have and you want them to be part of your new workflows. You can use them. So you can bring your Python scripts if you have any, and then have that as part of a new workflow that you're creating in Atom. Then you can have call activity, like I mentioned, these are going to be a function call into other workflows that you want to use as part of your main workflow, right? And then you can have serial and parallel tasks as well. So if you want to go ahead and execute an upgrade for 10 devices simultaneously, that's where your workflow will have parallel threads so that it goes ahead and then does your activity in parallel. And then let's take a look at this user input here. For example, this is a user form that we're looking at. And here you can see, I'm going to open up one of the forms here, form fields rather. So here you can see that you can mention what is the kind of type of the field. Okay, and then based on that, you can fill in some metadata properties. You can say, okay, this is a set of devices that I want to build and do a drop down here. I can contact Atom. So we have a schema browser where you can pick up the schema path, have that here, add it here, the Yang path, and add it here, so that when you actually execute the workflow, we are going to generate the drop down for you from our inventory database. This is just an example, right? And when you want, let's say you're trying to do a provisioning exercise and you want to make sure that the device is there, but I want to also list down all the interfaces related to the device, you can build that into the form as well. Right, and then you can build constraints, and you can say, you can even build, let's say you want to build a choice of different things. You can even have an enum represented here, and you can go ahead and add those values as well. So this is how you will go, and there are multiple options, right? You can have a lot of constraints. You can control the entire output for your operator so that they do not make any kind of mistakes. So that flexibility is already there as part of that. Now, once they go ahead and create a user input, the next one, one of the major tasks that you would utilize as part of the workflow is the service task. So example, if you want to go ahead and execute the show version command, right, you have the input parameters. Now, generally, whenever there is a task, there's going to be an API that's associated with it with an Atom. And this is, of course, extensively documented. And you can go ahead and choose that particular API. For example, in this case, we're trying to execute a command on a Juniper device. And there's an action attached to it. And then, of course, there's a payload that's attached to it. So in this case, the input parameters will capture the payload for this particular API here. Right? In this case, we're trying to execute show version and match GenOS. Now, once, and this particular space, right, is actually, you can see the script type is Groovy, but then it could be your regular expressions, it could be a Python, or it could be a JavaScript as well. So you could use one of those, and then you can have this code written. And then what you would do is, once we go ahead and execute this set of commands on the device, there's going to be some kind of an output that is going to come out, right? So we'll store that output as part of, let's say, Atom RPC output here, and then you can do some post-processing on top of it. And once you do that, there's going to be some value that's going to come out of that post-processing, and then you can go ahead and store that as part of a variable here. Now, this variable is different from the script variable that we're talking about here, but this variable is more at a workflow level. Now, where this can be utilized, right? So it can actually be utilized anywhere in the workflow. For example, we want to make sure in this particular specific use case, we're checking if the workflows or the device is already upgraded, right? If it is not, then we want to go ahead and upgrade. So in this case, we have a decision box that has come in. And the decision box, you can go ahead and say that, and I want to validate that particular variable. And if the value is true, then I want to take the workflow forward. But if it is false, then I kind of want to come out of the workflow. So this is how you can go ahead and utilize the service task and the variables that are coming out of it. All right. And then, of course, there's the prerequisites, and this is just to show you what are the different constructs that you could use, right? And there's the call activity, as I mentioned, and out of that, whatever variable is coming out, you can go ahead and you can validate that as part of this. For example, we are validating if there's enough space here, and then taking the workflow forward. Pre-checks again, as I mentioned, that it could be sort of show commands. Right, and then finally, you can take an approval. So let's say you want to, before the reboot, you want to take an approval from a ServiceNow or any other ITSM, or even with an Atom, you could take that and then take the workflow forward.
And again, are these all pre-populated fields, like in the expression, the ID and name? Is this all pre-built in the workflow that comes with Anuta, right? This isn't something that, as an end user, you're building from scratch unless you're adding something into this workflow, right?
That is true. So this is already available as part of the workflow. You really don't have to do anything. But in case you are creating new workflows, right? Let's say there is an automation, there's a use case requirement that has come in, and you want to go ahead and build that. What you could do is you could use our pre-built libraries, and this is something that we keep enriching every time we add a new functionality, right? And this catalog actually has all the different aspects of Atoms, right? From let's say you're building a new service, that is going to be available here. Let's say you're building a new compliance rule, that is going to be available here. Right? So you can go ahead and utilize it anywhere, so that in your workflows for it to basically cater to any of your use cases. So what you would do here is to basically just go ahead and drag and drop a particular task. And when you drag and drop, what would happen is the most important thing, as I mentioned, is going to be the payload for that particular API. Right? So what we're doing here is we are going to be pre-populate and make it available for the user, so they really don't have to know what exactly has to go in there. Right? The only thing that we would leave it out for them is the output parameters, because every customer is going to interpret that particular task in a different way, and that it may be different for every customer. So they can go ahead and feed that or do that post-processing in this particular section. But having said that, we know that there are going to be a lot of those tasks that are very commonly used for every vendor. So we have that already available. So in certain cases, you really don't even have to do this. You just have to go ahead, let's say a show version, you can just go ahead and drag and drop the task, and then that'll be taken care. And whatever variables are coming in, we can just pass it on to the next task as well.
I think this workflow view is really awesome, especially from an automation perspective. It's tough when you're looking at code, but one of the advantages of code is being able to have some type of infrastructure as code strategy, where if I wanted to make a change, I could just update a single file and see all this in one spot. Now, I know there's a northbound API that talks to the Atom workflow. Is that something I can see this data represented in code versus this workflow view?
Praveen, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, so there's an XML file that is the actual artifact that's rendering this image here. So that XML artifact can be something that you can put in your Git and maintain that as code, David.
Awesome, thanks.
So is there any integration with the vendor? Because a couple weeks ago, we did a firewall upgrade that had controllers and all this other stuff. And there were certain things you absolutely had to do in order, like upgrade the BIOS before you did the image. And then you had to go over to the secondary unit before you do the primary unit. And so this is really simple. This is great for a simple upgrade. It's one image, you're upgrading it, but it doesn't sort of show the complexities of a vendor. And so my question is there a toolback to say, okay, Juniper, check this. I'm trying to upgrade this HA pair. Is it going to work? What is their recommended processes, or is this more to set up simple cases?
No, so we could go ahead and execute really complex use cases as well. So I think I'm going to, for example, in your scenario, let's say you want to have the specific vendors recommended ways of doing it. There are multiple dependencies in terms of the upgrade. We could have all of that, so in a specific use case, right? Let's say you have to have approvals. There could be, in this particular case, go ahead and contact an image server to upload the image. And maybe there you want to make sure that there is the prime, like you said, let's say it's like a scenario where you have an HSRP kind of configuration or VRRP kind of configuration. You want to make sure that you first switch over and then do an upgrade. And then once you do that, validate the traffic, and then again come back and then, switch back the primary, secondary, and then do the next upgrade. So you could have all of that kind of complexity also handled as part of the workflows. So as I mentioned, this is a method of procedure that you're trying to execute, and that method of procedure, if it demands certain complexity, that is what we can try and simplify using the workflows.
Okay, so it's not, I can add anything I want, but by default, it's not there. That's what you're saying.
So we do out of the box, for example, in certain scenarios, some of the commonly vendor recommended method of procedures, some of the common operational procedures that you would come across in a lot of service providers and enterprises, those are available as part of Atom. But then, of course, there's going to be that Delta use case, which probably has that extra complexity that we have to, go ahead and we can bring that in. But again, when we have to bring any of that kind of a support, we typically don't take more than a couple of weeks to bring any kind of complex for any kind of complex use cases.
Thank you.
All right, let's go to the next section here. This is the this is a provisioning workflow. So what we saw was an upgrade workflow, but this is like a IPv4 to v6 kind of network migration use case, where again, we are trying to take some user inputs here, validate that the device is online. We're checking the vendor because here it's a multi-vendor scenario, and we wanted to make sure that we cover we handle for each of them. There will be separate set of use, what we call the pre-checks and the post-checks. So we want to make sure that those are catered to. So we validate the vendor, then we get to the pre-checks. So in the pre-checks, this is the pre-check workflow. So here you can see once we get into the pre-check workflow, we then validate the platform. So because now, for example, Cisco has multiple platforms, so they may have multiple different show commands for each of those platforms. So for iOS XE, we have these kind of devices. For iOS XR, we have some other, so these kind of show commands. For iOS XR, there could be a different set of show commands. And then for GNOS, we have a different set. So let's say there's a multi-vendor scenario. We can have this kind of a workflow, which kind of takes a different route. Each time there is a different vendor that is coming in. So we could handle that as here. And then we talked about the error scenarios earlier. We pick that up and then escalate back here. If everything is good, then we go ahead and provision the interface configurations. We perform the routing configurations, perform the post checks, and then we do the once the post checks are done, we go ahead and validate those post checks. Now, this is where the pre-checks and the post checks are going to be validated. We'll verify if they remain the same or whatever the condition, right? We can go ahead and have that mentioned there. So we go ahead and verify that. And then here, as you can see, if the post check validation fails, then we immediately trigger a rollback. So you can see here, we come back here, we go ahead and release the IPs that are coming from an IPAM. Right, we execute the rollback command. So this is more of a triggered rollback. But let's say you want to go ahead and execute this in your lab for maybe for a week and then do a rollback yourself. We can go ahead and do that as well. So we have a on-demand rollback also made available to you, so that you can just based on an approval, we can go ahead and do that on-demand rollback as well. So this is the interface configuration workflow. So you can see here how we are, again validating the vendors, and then we are checking the IPAM. We're reserving an IPAM block here. Then we're generating the commands for Cisco, and then there is approvals involved. Right, and then we're also making sure that there are you can see there are a few other icons that you can see here. This is specifically to make sure that there is a set of decisions being taken here, there's a set of commands being generated here. But what if it fails in a subsequent step? So that is a case where we are kind of compensating for any of those failures in the workflow, so that if it fails here, then we want to make sure that it comes back to this particular task, and then we do a rollback from there. So that all those kind of possibilities are also available. So if you see that even from a programming logic, if you want to go ahead and handle any of this, you really have to make sure that there's enough of code going in there. But with the workflows, you can make sure that this is very flexible and standardized, right? So that anybody coming in to use this, they exactly know. And we also can use the workflows to be a documentation as well. As you can see these annotations, so that it's very clearly mentioned what exactly a particular workflow is for.
Dilip, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
I mean, the workflows are really kind of interesting, right? It does give you a good visualization of what you're trying to accomplish. But where does the code fit in? Where we're doing things like making VLAN changes or doing the doing code upgrades, verifying code. How does all that get tied in?
So your question here is that when you're trying to do a particular section, a particular config change on a particular set of devices, how does that reflect back into Atom? Is that the question?
Well, yeah, even if it's just whatever whatever task you're trying to automate to make your life easier. I see how we're building out all these flows, but how am I instructing Atom to go out and do the thing that I need it to do?
All right. So in that case, so once we have this, let's say we have to particularly push up a set of configurations, what we would do is we would use one of the, let's say there are multiple ways. Let me just go ahead and show you that particular slide here, right? So we could use here that the workflow in this case can directly go ahead and talk to the devices. There are multiple ways of doing it. The workflow can come and use one of these to directly go ahead and talk to the devices, or it can go ahead and instruct the device models with an Atom. So in case you want to maintain the state of that particular configuration, the workflows can talk to a device model. So let's say we have a particular native Yang for a Juniper device, and it's specific to the VLAN or a VRF creation. When that specific section of automating that particular task is going to come into Atom, we're going to call the particular device model, that particular leaf where this has to go in, and then we'll go ahead and automate that, and then finally maintain the state here. Or let's say you have a set of services that you're trying to automate. So the workflow can go ahead and call the services also. So again, in that particular section, we have to go ahead and call our service. We can go ahead and mention that Yang path for that particular service, and then that service would talk to the device models. This is how when you trigger something from the workflow, these are the different routes it can take to go ahead and talk to the devices.
Okay, so am I going to have to write out the Python scripts or the CLI scripts, or are they canned for a particular vendor with Atom, and this just sort of helps map out all those pieces, or?
Right. So with the data model, the device data model, and the service models, of course, they're going to be standard. The native Yang, of course, is going to be your specific vendor-based device models. That's going to be there, right? For these, for the ones that are going to be directly where the workflow is directly going to talk to the devices. So that is where, as I mentioned, we do have a lot of them available already, and you can just go ahead and utilize them. So for every vendor, we do have a lot of reusable libraries that we have created, which you can just directly drag and drop. But then there's always that extra that you can always do, right? You can go ahead and write your own scripts as well, and then the specific CLIs and the API calls wherever you need to do that.
Okay, so then just so I'm totally clear, is once you write out all your workflows and you've got the device models that Atom has created, we put them into this repository, and then your workflow can then grab those pieces of information and apply whatever the workflow says.
That is right.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Let's take one more example here. This is how the workflow will be utilized for some of the closed loop automation scenarios. So we saw the upgrade section. We saw how we can use it for a provisioning use case, but how can we use it for a specific scenario like a closed loop automation? So these are the kind of alerts that can come into Atom. So these alerts are coming in based on a specific alert definition that you're trying to do with Atom. So you have a lot of them out of the box. For example, here we're trying to track a BGP neighbor flap. We have a set of conditions that are already mentioned here, and we also have some of the actions that you can take. So when the conditions are met, or let's say the specific KPI threshold that you're trying to mention gets breached, the alerts get created or are generated. And then once the alerts are generated, from a closed loop automation standpoint, you would want to take some action on top of it. And this could be completely automated using Atom's CLA, or it could be like more of a manual option where you can just go and choose a particular remediation action as well. So here, just as an example, we have a lot of actions that have been shown here, right? You can go ahead and choose whatever action that you want. The action could be, again, a particular, you can go ahead and choose a Slack notification to be your action, or it could be your email, or it could be a workflow workflow. Now, this is where the workflow will take the shape of a troubleshooting workflow or a remediation workflow, right? So let's say there's a BGP neighbor flap that is happening. That workflow, this particular workflow gets triggered, where we can again validate it with set of pre-checks. We can, let's say, go ahead and shut down the neighbor for you, and then let's say do some post checks, and then maybe let's say the issue gets resolved, then we can go ahead and execute a rollback. So you can see how we can bring in a set of different kind of use cases using Atom, right? So the closed loop automation being one of the very common ones these days, where they want to go ahead and automate all these different operational issues that they're facing. So where as I mentioned, so it's about generating the alert, tying the alert into a workflow, the workflow performing a set of pre-checks, performing the action, performing the post-checks, and once it is resolved, performing a rollback of the scenario. So, and similarly, we have several such alerting rules that we have, and based on that, several closed loop automation use cases can also be executed. And similarly, we have the event correlation. We also have alert routing. All those different aspects are also supported as part of that.
When these workflows are running, do you see those little boxes like highlight or something depending on what part of the workflow you're on, or how do you know if part of the workflow fails?
That's true. That's true. So, so you can see here, this particular legend here kind of highlights that the workflow is actually at this point, and it also has a couple of instances or a couple of workflows are actually running and waiting at this particular section. Right, so that's what it shows. So you'll have this legend go progress across these different tasks, so that it'll give you a clear idea on where your particular workflow is. And if it fails, the two options, it either gets you get an idea on the task here, or you can go ahead and look at the tasks here, where it'll show you. Let's say it'll be appearing something like this, where it'll show that something has failed with an error, and then that particular box is going, that particular task is going to show you what exactly has changed.